the last ones for both meetings, but I don't know. I don't know. I don't really answer your question. Yeah, there's actually some new, there's some names obviously that jumped out at me, but some of them do not.
Sounds good. No, it's been emails. I've got emails. Materials for last week. Yeah, it wasn't. There have been no deliverables here. Besides the vision statement. This is very dense. This is just a lot of very dense reading.
Dense reading?
Dense. Is Peter here? It's because of Peter.
I'm trying to, or that, yes, well that, yes. But yes, it's,
I know I did.
it's so big the PDF can't even, Carrie had to make a second
Yeah,
one.
it's pretty big.
Office. Hey, Peter. Welcome. Are we on? Good evening. Welcome to the Hanover Selectboard meeting of October 17th, 2022. We're here tonight to have some fun and do good work for the town. As always, the first order of business is public comment. David.
Good evening. I come here again because I'm a retired Army officer sworn to uphold the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Since 2005, when I discovered that the town was knowingly polluting Mink Brook and other waters with asphalt waste dumping adjacent to Mink Brook and Storrs Pond, I began to come to these meetings to try to get some measure of action by the town, but the town told me that they were going to continue the program despite my efforts to stop them. Not only did they continue their program along with Dartmouth College, but they also began silencing me. Now I come to you at these meetings. You've closed the portion of the meeting, the other business portion of the meeting, so I can't speak there. Now you're limiting my time to 5 minutes at the beginning of these meetings so that I have very little time to go through the history of just what you have all done. Now, this group, the 5 people here, plus former town manager Julia Griffin, came to a secret agreement that they were not going to answer any of my questions. Is that agreement still in force, Peter?
There was no such agreement, but we've chosen not to respond to your questions. That's correct.
You've chosen not to respond to my questions, that's what I said. But during the time that you've been not answering my questions, you also told Cat V Studios that you were answering my questions in writing, personally. And that was not true, was it, Peter? Have you ever responded to any of my questions, Peter?
The town has responded adequately to all of your questions, David.
No, they have not. After doing nothing about stopping the polluting for a number of years, the town, you 5 plus Julie Griffin, voted to put a fence around my property, the property of my family, and the property where we ran the homeless shelter. you put a fence up after blockading our driveway shut, and between 11 and 13 town officials were aware that we were being held illegally in violation of our constitutional rights. You had members of the fire department, including the fire chief and his deputy. You have the police chief and police officers. You have the highway department head, zoning department head, 5 select board members, and the town manager. All were aware that people were being held down there in violation of their civil rights. There was Marcus Bonner, Derek Dubé, Aubrey McAllister, Jalen DeBose, Idris Richardson, and Aaron Johnson. 3 African-American men, 2 disabled men, and 2 veterans were held in violation of their civil rights, while town officials looked away and continue to look away. Since the time that those people were incarcerated on 9 November 2016, I've repeatedly asked you to call in federal authorities to investigate what are civil rights violations, federal crimes, and you have refused. Your police department has refused to call in federal authorities. And even though I've come to you repeatedly asking, you've also refused to call anybody, either the state or the feds. Now, I would like to ask you some questions that you have put off for the last 17 years. Who approved asphalt waste dumping with Dartmouth on town roads?
David, you have 2 more minutes.
Who was allowed to dump asphalt waste all along the town roads? You're not going to answer any questions again?
Correct.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Hearing none, the first order of business is a public hearing to consider adoption of a recommended changes to the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire Joint Power Agreement. Public hearing is open. Mr. Kabaki.
Good evening. Pete Kovacki, the Director of Public Works. I'm the alternate member to Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, representing the town of Hanover. During our past year, our anniversary will be, I think it's Saturday, next Saturday, will be 1 year since the incorporation. It's become obvious that some of the bylaws are a little restrictive, and there's one change that's being requested that all communities adopt, which will allow a modification of how we can modify the bylaws right now, currently only at the annual meeting, which is in April.
Peter, could I ask you to step back one step and
Yes.
just educate the public as to what the Community Power Coalition is?
Okay, the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire is a joint powers agreement between, right now it's 20 communities in a 1 county who have joined forces together to purchase power for the citizens of those communities. And by doing so, we hope to be able to beat the rates that the default companies are offering right now, particularly in the doubling rates this year. So it's something that's been in the works for
And
approximately 2 years.
also to ensure green energy, correct?
That's the reason, the driving force for Hanover was to be able to procure more green energy. Yes.
And we entered in this agreement,
It was entered, the town signed the agreement a year ago.
Yeah.
And
I believe that was voted on at town meeting.
voting on a town meeting by the citizens, and the Board of Selectmen authorized Julia to sign the agreement. And then we adopted the energy aggregation plan, which will be the second hearing at town meeting, on a subsequent town
So
meeting.
you're here tonight to, just because there were some changes in the bylaws or
These are,
governing laws of this group that needed to be approved by the select board?
yes.
Okay.
So the select board for all the communities who are, or city councils who represent these communities must approve these changes for them to become effective. At this point, several have already done that. We're just going through the process as we do our aggregation plan to also recommend that we change our, the bylaws to allow us to make amendments other than just the annual meeting, but at any board meeting.
Okay. And for the public, we had a chance at the last meeting, when we set this public hearing, we did review to a certain extent the changes that were being proposed, and I found them modest, shall we say. Pretty routine changes in the bylaws needing to be appropriate for how you're actually doing business.
It's particularly this time of year, with this time in the process, is as we're ramping up to launch, it's becoming more obvious that we need to be more nimble and be able to change the bylaws if necessary for potentially borrowing for this organization, or make other amendments that will allow us to be more nimble on our feet.
And our Hanover Energy Committee met and reviewed and approved these, right?
They didn't review the joint powers agreement. It's the energy aggregation plan is what they met. This is the,
Okay.
The next one.
yes, that's the next one.
Any other questions by the board? So I move that we adopt the recommended changes to the Community Power Coalition as presented.
I'll second that.
This is a public hearing. Any input from the public? Hearing none. I call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you, Peter. The next order of business is a public hearing to review. I close that public hearing. The next order of business is a public hearing to review the recommended changes to the Hanover Energy Aggregation Plan. Peter, would you tell us,
So
get us to 60,000 feet,
sure.
then bring us down to this one?
Our aggregation plan is basically the rules that we will use as the energy committee for the town to decide how to buy power, how to enter into either going with an organization like CPC&H or some other avenue to allow us to be able to procure power. And it allows us to look at better rates, more green power, so it gives us more options. We have already adopted the plan at town meeting in 2021. There were some amendments that were made to the statute that required us to go back to the Public Utilities Commission to amend our plan that allow us to look at how we will procure power, and that's really the portfolio management of how the energy is being procured, as well as how we protect customer data, so we can make sure that customer data is not shared, so it's all protected. There were some guidelines that were required to be adopted. Several communities have already adopted the amendments. There's two amendments to this plan, the last two pages, two sections, attachments. Attachment 8 and 9 are the substantive changes. Those are the ones for data protection as well as portfolio management. Lebanon has already been approved by the PUC. Enfield has already been adopted, been sent to the PUC. And for us to be considered one of the first wave or the launch members, we need to approve the same changes and have those approved by the PUC. There's some other changes here to the document. We updated some things. We modified some of the language to make sure we had flexibility if for some reason CPC&H got bogged down in some way and was going in a direction that wasn't the direction we wanted to, or somebody came forward with an option that provided the sort of green energy that we were looking for as a community, either better rates or better conditions. So this gives us the flexibility to search if we need to for different entities to help us purchase power, but also protect the data for our citizens.
Would it be accurate to say that these changes do not in any way impact the original intent of the plan?
They do not. We intended, in our original plan, our language was somewhat light on how we would do it. We said we would do it, but not specifics on how we would go about it. This changes actually give the specifics of how energy is procured, how data is protected, who can look at it, who can see what entities will share what parts of it, and to make sure that we're not going to be party to people taking data, people's information and sharing that and selling that, and that's what happens in some of the other states. So that was a big concern of the consumer advocate, as well as some of the utilities, as well as obviously communities.
Questions, board? Questions from the public? So I move that we adopt the changes to the Hanover Energy Aggregation Plan.
Second?
Those seconding it, further discussion? I guess I should also say this is all a part of the Sustainable Hanover effort that we've been at for 10 years and made some significant progress in. So these are just pieces of that bigger program. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? It passes.
So the next part of the process is I submit the plan to the Public Utilities Commission, Consumer Advocate, Department of Energy, and all the utilities. PUC has 60 days to approve or review or approve or deny the plan. Since we made the same changes that Lebanon made, it should be much faster. Wave 1 will potentially launch sometime in the April-May timeframe of next year. The default utility of Liberty or Eversource or New Hampshire Electric Co-op, we may launch in all 3 of them. We may just launch in Liberty, depending on the rates, depending on the timing of things. Once the default rates have been released, we will then notify all the residents of what the rate offering will be from Hanover Community Power. And then they have a choice, a chance to opt out and stay with the default or go to another third party. And they can move at any point, any month. They can go in to our program or leave our program in any month. So each time you read, after the next reading, you can change if you wanted to. So it does keep the flexibility residents will have. Something that's not offered with third parties. Generally, you have to sign in for a year, potentially, or 2 years to get rates. Ours will be, this is the rate. Default utilities rates will be known, and as people know, they doubled this year. They're likely to drop in the spring. They'll likely double again next. They may drop down to something similar to what we saw previously, but they'll go back up until the markets change. And
Peter, I trust is when we roll this out, it's going to have to be a pretty significant communication
Yes.
effort so people understand
Everybody
what the
will
program
be
is
sent
and what their
some-
options are.
There'll need to be a public hearing on the rates. We'll have a rate that will be released, and then we'll be off and
Most
running.
people do not know this is coming. And
They don't,
everyone-
and most
Everyone
people-
I've talked to has
right.
been very excited about that opportunity, but they still need to be communicated.
It's going to be a bit of a, I mean, we were hoping that when we launch, we'd actually be able to offer 100% renewable power cheaper than the default utility, but don't see that happening. But we will get there. It's a question of just the timing of it, and one of the issues is setting up this CPC&H is a pretty daunting task. There have been no less than 40 people working on it for the better part of a year, working on, I've put in probably 200 hours above and beyond my regular work schedule, just to help move this along. And there's been a lot of other people that know a lot more to help this move along. So there's a lot going on, a lot of momentum, but plenty of roadblocks that could trip us up, and hopefully
Okay.
it doesn't happen.
Peter, while I have you there.
Yes.
Can you update us on when we'll get new lighting around the green?
Well, we have a grant from the Department of Energy that the paperwork has been submitted. I'm waiting for an approval, the final approval to launch, and at that point, it looks like sometime in November I'll be able to put out a bid, and then by spring we should have new lights on the utility poles. Around the green, we'll have to work a little bit harder with Dartmouth College because they actually control those lights. I'm working with them as well.
Good. Just the reason I asked it tonight was driving in tonight was one of those crazy nights. I don't know why, the fog, the lighting,
Right.
the drizzle. You could not see people crossing to the green from Hopkins Center. And I've learned to go almost 0 miles an hour through there, but sometimes it's just impossible to see people. So beware.
Right.
Thank you, Peter.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Okay, the next, I close that public hearing. I open up another public hearing to accept unanticipated funds in the amount of $50,000 from the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation for the Hanover Fire Department's station alerting system. Chief?
Good evening. Martin McMillan, Hanover Fire Chief.
That's okay, go. This is a wonderful gift. You
It
gave us a
is.
little background on it at our last meeting, why don't we do it again?
Okay. Several years ago, we started a conversation with our local partners, Lebanon and Hartford, which have individual dispatch capabilities, looking at the possibility of creating a regional dispatch. For a lot of reasons, we never got there. And it's a very complicated issue, it's very expensive, and obviously with the two states and different laws, because police departments do some dispatching, there's a lot of nuances, for lack of a better term, in trying to make this thing happen. So one of the problems that we have, and I'll give you a quick example, if this moment a fire occurred in Lebanon. Now, we run with Lebanon, as does Hartford, on what we call automatic aid on any significant event. So the Lebanon dispatcher would take that information, they would hit a tone for the Lebanon Fire Department and dispatch a structure fire in Lebanon. They would then pick up the phone and call Hanover and say, hey, Hanover, would you dispatch the following companies, the Mutual Aid, Enfield, Playing Field, Hartford, us, to respond to that same address. Then the dispatcher would pick the phone up and call Hartford and say, hey, Hartford, would you dispatch? All right, big delay, unfortunately, and that's just the way it is. Part of the problem is when you get a phone call, you put it into a computer system, it's called a CAD, a computer-aided dispatch. And the three CADs in the Upper Valley are three different CADs and they don't talk to one another. So Hartford years ago bought a program and it's robotic in nature. And what happens is when the call comes in, it's able to put it out automatically into the stations with a robotic voice, much the same way like in the weather station when they give you a weather update. And you can actually change the voices, it's kind of unique. And it happens instantaneous. So what we're looking to do, instead of having the CADs and a regional dispatch, is to create this system in the three career departments. So when, doesn't matter which dispatch center hits a button, that robotic voice will then be transmitted into each firehouse, pretty much automatically. We still have to have our dispatchers hit the tone, create a job. My pager will not go off until that, but it will speed up the system for the people that are on duty. Right now, Lebanon also purchased that a couple years ago. The cost of that is in the neighborhood now. It's come down. It was about $180,000. It's down to about $130,000. So Chris Doolin, who's our communication officer, has been pushing for this, and with COVID and money tight, I said, well, let's try this on a grant-funded basis, and why don't you reach out to the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation. So they were incredibly generous and donated $50,000 to this cause. We have some other funds available through FEMA and some grants, and we're real close to making this a reality. And I would move that you would support this effort, and I would hope the people in the community would also support that by approving this.
Thank you for that update.
Hopefully not too long.
Questions, board? Questions for the public?
The only other question I have is, it's 130,000 and we have 50,000, where's the 80,000 coming from? Because I don't
Right.
recall it being in the budget.
So we got a grant from last year for 50. I got another FEMA grant for 17 for some COVID-related expenses from last year's budget. We've got a couple of smaller donations, so we're right around, I think, about 123 right now, waiting for a figure.
Okay,
So we're
thank you.
close.
Thanks, Marty.
Thank you.
Okay, so I move that we accept the generous
Oh, there's
donation
a
of the Byrne
question
Foundation.
from Kari.
Oh, I'm still gonna move that, Carrie, and then we'll get a second and we'll come to you on. I move that we accept this donation. Do I hear a second?
Second.
After a second.
You want
Kari,
to share the table?
public
again?
comment.
Sure. So Kari Asmus of Etna, and I was just listening to how close he is, and that how tax funds, that are gathered through the property taxes aren't eligible for this. So I was just wondering, is this something that would qualify for use of the Brissette Fund? And maybe the answer is we don't know tonight. But I just, have read about what the requirements are. When I think about how close he is and how it, is really something that benefits our community as well as our employees. If it's needed, I guess I would say, yes, I have a question, is it possible? And if it's possible, I hope that you would consider it.
Thank you. Any other public input? Hearing none. Any other questions? I call the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much, Chief, and thank you, Byrne Foundation. Wonderful gift, as always. I now close that public hearing and open a public hearing for the consideration and adoption of the rental housing ordinance. Here are a few comments I'd like to make before we get started. Just a list of comments about how I perceive this ordinance and the process that got us here tonight. Hanover has had a rental housing problem for many years, and that some rental units are unsafe and dangerous from a health and safety perspective. The town originally tried to address this problem by adopting a rental housing ordinance in 2013. Like many of our ordinances, it was complaint-driven and did not give the town the authority to inspect potentially unsafe units without first receiving a complaint. The system has not worked, and a serious problem persists. This ordinance takes a different approach to reaching the same goal we had in 2013, in that it will allow the town to inspect all rental units every 3 years, or more frequently if it believes unsafe conditions exist. The cost has been kept as low as possible, which will be around $8.33 per month per unit, an amount that we believe will not substantially impact the rental market or future development of additional rental units. The cost will be borne by the owners of the units, but will most likely be passed on to the tenants. While there is a public good to having safe rental units, we believe that the cost should primarily be borne by those who receive rental income as part of their cost of doing business. The general public will be financially supporting this program by providing the needed infrastructure within our planning office, our HR office, and other departments as they call into play. The process that we followed. This has been the most thorough and inclusive process for an ordinance that I have experienced in my many years. The original draft was developed by our planning department with input from the town manager and our legal counsel. We have had multiple public hearings, received feedback at several select board meetings, and held a workshop on the ordinance. We received abundant feedback, and when we agreed, we made changes. When we did not agree, we did not make changes. Most, if not all, of the recent changes were aimed at making the ordinance more concise and easier to understand, but did not involve substantive changes, which remains pretty straightforward. Owners will register their units, as they now have to do. They will be inspected every 3 years based upon existing codes. Pretty straightforward. We acknowledge that the ordinance is a work in progress and will most likely need to be refined as we learn from the implementation stage. We will not hesitate to make changes if needed. I will stop there. Any other comments or input from the board before we get started with the public comment? Alex, do you have any, or Rob or Laura want to any opening comments before we get into the public stage?
I'll add a thought or two, and then Rob, I don't know if you want to come up as well, but thank you, Peter. And I'll say too, just from being new to Hanover and going through, this is our first ordinance that I've worked on with all of you. And I appreciate the interactivity of the process. We have made a lot of changes, and I think some of those changes have been really helpful in clarifying the ordinance. And so I just want to thank the board on that side of it. And I guess part of the perspective here, I mean, this was happening, the conversation here about rental housing was happening well before I came to Hanover, but you know, I've worked in other towns. Every town I've worked in has had some sort of program similar to this, where rental housing units were inspected. Some ran it through, different towns did it in different ways. But I grew up and was on the rescue squad and was the mayor of a town where we had a tragedy that prompted some of the changes. And so at Seton Hall University about 20 years ago, they had a really tragic and horrific fire, one of the worst fires on a college campus. And this university and the town, the fire department, a lot of stakeholder groups got very, very active and did an incredible job, not only upgrading buildings and facilities and sprinkler systems and all that kind of stuff, but also doing behavioral changes and doing broad education and outreach programs to the community and make sure that especially students coming in knew how to keep the units safe. And I think that it's commendable that what we're trying to do here is get ahead of that a little bit. I mean, this is a very serious issue. It's not a nice to have sort of thing, but there are very serious safety and health concerns. And I wanted to read a couple quotes out to contextualize some of that. So these are statements from students who rented in Hanover, and this was some feedback that was collected by the student body presidents. Thank you, David, Dartmouth College, for doing that. I've had a lot of conversations with students, undergraduate and graduate students about this, and have gotten a lot of feedback. And so I just want to read a couple of these quotes out because I think this contextualizes a little bit of what we're talking about. So, quote, "We literally didn't have a fire alarm." Quote, "Everything was really dirty and old with poor ventilation and no smoke detectors." Quote, "There are no smoke detectors in mine and the apartment is grimy." Quote, "Yeah, problems also in violation of fire safety laws." And I hear things like this, and this is pretty terrifying. That these are rental units that people are living in Hanover tonight. People are in units that are potentially that unsafe. This is a really good step towards addressing some of those things. And I'll say that since I've been up here in Hanover, I've had the chance to meet maybe 40 or 50 other town managers in New Hampshire and Vermont. And as we all like to do, in the value of some of those meetings is sharing what you're working on and getting feedback from other people and other shapes and sizes of towns. And the feedback that I've gotten from other managers is this is an area where the state of New Hampshire is far behind. And they kind of said, thumbs up, Hanover, it's tough to work on this, but thumbs up for trying to get out ahead of this. And so I just want to thank the board again for doing that, and that we all have a little bit of a role here. The town, we kind of need to take this on. Landlords, I think, need to comply, obviously, with the rules that we're going to be creating. And of course, people living in the units need to use good common sense and make sure that they're living in safe units and that their behavior is aligned with all of these goals as well. And I'm pretty sure that if the three of us, the three different parties there, work together on this front, there is a significant impact that we can make in improving the safety of rental units. So I appreciate you all hearing my kind of perspective on that, and it's been a pleasure to work with everybody, members of the public, the staff, and the board on getting this to a really good product.
Thank you. Rob, you want to have any opening comments?
I'll be fairly brief, very brief. Yeah, thank you all. Rob Hausman, Director of Planning, Town of Hanover. In our office, we have a saying, "Not on my watch." What I mean by that is, if there's anything we can do from a regulatory standpoint that prevents injury or death due to enforcement of codes, we want to make sure that happens. And this is a proactive approach to ensuring that basic housing standards are met in a snapshot in time. It's not dealing with necessarily occupant behavior, which can bring the place out of compliance, but that snapshot in time ensures that the units meet code. And it ranges from operable windows. Some are painted shut, some are secured shut. Those are egress requirements often, to functioning smoke and smoke and carbon dioxide detectors. So from my perspective, I think we all can agree that all housing in Hanover should be safe, meet safe minimum housing code. And here's our chance to ensure that the rental housing stock does that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Bill?
Just for those who are in the room, there's been a lot of drafts of this document. The latest draft is on that table, if you're interested. If you don't have it, it's been available electronically, but I just know some people have been struggling, including me, keeping up on the drafts. So I just have one comment on the wording, so I didn't know when you want to get to that. But,
I have two more changes.
well, I have a suggestion, so just,
Shall I, based on mine, or?
no, separate. You go first.
Okay.
Alex and Rob.
It never ends, right? Board, I'm recommending we change the wording in 1V2 that now reads, an owner-occupied dwelling which is renting a room, I don't think dwellings rent rooms, to an owner-occupied dwelling with a rented room, parent S, without separate cooking facilities, dot, dot, dot. So it's just,
Section 4.
that is section 1V2,
Alright.
section 4.2. Page 1, I think it's page 1. So it now reads, 1V4.2 reads, an owner-occupied dwelling which is renting a room, parent S. And I want it to read, an owner-occupied dwelling with a rented room, parent S. So I don't think dwellings rent rooms. And then my second one is really a typo on page 5, I think it is, V118G. The second word needs to be a rather than an.
Mhm.
It's just a typo.
Responsibility.
Sorry?
Versus and, yeah.
Okay.
That was the only thing I caught, but I was like,
Okay, Bill, you have another
Close
one?
enough.
Yeah, under Roman numeral 4, under number 1, dwelling units,
Yep.
in the big paragraph, third line, second line, I'm sorry. Housekeeping establishment for occupancy by an individual or a family. Obviously, many of our rental units are 3-person groups. So I didn't know if those two, individual and family, does not describe many of our rental people. So I didn't know what words are appropriate, Rob, but just, or group of,
This is from the zoning ordinance, so
From the
I'm not
zoning.
sure we can change that.
Okay.
I think the objective was to pull something right out of the zoning
Yeah.
ordinance
Alright,
that
so
defines
This
that.
would be a note for,
all right, so this is in the zoning ordinance. I suggest we consider changing the wording when you get around to it,
I
but
think
just,
it is.
So, Bill,
I think
that's,
you're passing on that motion?
let these guys, can you respond to that? 'Cause
Sure.
I think it's,
Actually, the definition of family is fairly broad. It's
Yeah.
not your traditional nuclear family anymore. So it includes domestic partners and other
no,
things.
no, I thought family covered all that. 3 students who just are juniors in college, who
Yep.
just all buddied up to rent a place. I
Does
just
not
didn't-
constitute a member,
Yeah.
it does not constitute a family by definition.
Right, so I didn't know, maybe that should be modified in the,
We could reference the definition of family.
yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have those 2 specific changes on the table. Do I hear support for both of those?
oh, yeah,
Oh, yeah,
Sure.
they're done on that.
I like proper English.
Thank you. Okay, so let me open up to the public.
come on up. Man with mask.
Hi, my name's Rich Greger. I've been a resident of Hanover for almost 14 years, and 10 of those years I've been a landlord. I'm a really small landlord, and I wanted to give some feedback to the board regarding the document that I assume it's the same that you're looking at because I downloaded it off the website today. So after reviewing it, hopefully thoroughly, I had some concerns and questions, especially as a small landlord. I have 2 units. One unit I rent occasionally, it's my in-law apartment. The other unit, I own a condo, which I've rented almost continuously for the last 10 years. I guess the first comment I have is regarding Section 7, Certificate of Compliance. Really, it's not for me, it's more for perhaps other landlords, and I'm just bringing this point to the board's attention. You state under Section A, the last paragraph, the failure of the department to notify an owner of an applicable property of the COC requirements shall not excuse the owner from complying with this ordinance. It's my understanding that maybe about a quarter of the properties in this town are owned by people that don't live here. Is that a fair statement, or?
I just don't know that stat.
Okay, that's what I was told by somebody, but in any case, I don't know how many of those absentee owners are actually living in close proximity, so I'm just trying to understand how the board plans to inform these landlords that are not living here. Obviously, as a resident, I found out about this, but it was only recently, so I'm just curious as to how the people that are not here are gonna be notified about this.
Well, we could try to answer that tonight, but there'll be a whole, I mean, after this, if this is adopted,
Right.
there'll be a whole, another set of documents that talk about procedures and processes and how we do all this stuff.
All right, so
And
I'm
we'll
getting
have to be very rigorous in making sure that we do our
Right,
best
okay.
we can to let everybody know.
All right, it was just a curious question. I guess to the meat of the matter for me, though, there's several sections which I feel kind of are perhaps maybe not necessary, or at least kind of seem to be questionable in my mind. I'm going to refer you to section 7 again, I and J. And it's upon conveyance of a property. So, for example, in my situation, I have a condo. If I sell it to a family that has no intention of renting it, why is there a transfer permit that's needed to be made?
We're talking about J?
Yes. What's the, I don't understand the rationale for that. And
I would guess, sorry.
Section
Rob,
7.
you want to try to answer that?
Rob, I suggest you get a chair up front here. So you
Park yourself,
Hey, Rob.
So the only time it would apply is if the new purchaser intends to rent it.
Okay,
Otherwise, the
you should state that in here. And then to go along with that, section J, I'm a little curious as to, like, for example, in the situation of a real estate broker, if I were to go to sell, again, using my condo as an example, it seems like they have the right to request a department to inspect the unit. I understand that, but how, it's kind of like, if I'm selling the unit, isn't that really the responsibility of the buyer to, you know, like normally when you have a transaction, it's the buyer who hires an inspector to do all that work. So why is it my responsibility, again, using that example? And right now, the way I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I go to sell my condo, I would have to pay an inspection fee. And I guess it would be a re-inspection fee if it's already been inspected once as a rental of $75 if I go to sell it again to I mean, I understand a landlord-to-landlord transaction, but if this is going to be a private residence going forward, where's the rationale for that?
Again, it would not be required to be.
Okay, I'm just pointing it out, though, the way the document reads right now, it would, essentially, I'm assuming that whoever's renting is going to be grandfathered under this, so that they would have to adhere to these fees, if that makes sense. Because there's nothing that stipulates that if you're selling it to a non-landlord or something to that effect.
Well, this ordinance only is applicable for rental properties, and so if
No, I
someone owned a
understand that, but
property.
this is talking about the transaction of selling that property. It says
Right.
conveyance of a property. So the way I read this, it sounds like if I go sell my property to somebody who's gonna own it as their own personal residence, I'm still gonna be responsible for paying a fee on that. Does that make sense?
I mean, I certainly see what you're saying, though, it's definitely not what the town is doing.
Well,
But
okay,
understanding the
no, I
clarity of the
understand,
language,
but
yeah.
I'm just clarifying.
Yeah,
You know, that's what I'm getting at here. And then to go along with that, though, you know, it has like a list of whole different interested parties that could potentially request that a landlord pay these fees, including financial institutions and other with legitimate interest. I mean, that's kind of vague, and I'm to understand who are others with legitimate interest.
I think the real question is who pays under J?
Right, I mean, it's the
been my
way
assumption
I
that-
interpret it right now as a landlord, I would
It's
have
been
to
my
pay every time a
assumption-
bank wants to, like,
It's
say,
been my assumption that the person making the request, the party making the request, pays for the inspection.
okay, well, that's fair and that's reasonable, but it was not very clear to me when I read this. It almost implied that I would be responsible every time somebody wanted to have an inspection done, I guess. Is it-
We'll make sure that's clear.
Okay, yeah, that would,
The intent is
appreciate
that the
I would
person
appreciate
making the request
that. Okay.
pays the money.
Okay, and then, moving on quickly, I don't want to tie up too much of the board's time here. Under section 9, I mean, it says all units must be registered with the department. Does that include, like, for example, Dartmouth, that they have units that are being rented like this?
Correct.
So all, in any other entity that's in the town?
There are 330 off-campus rental units owned and managed by Dartmouth that would be part of this program.
I see, okay. All right. And then, under that same section, section C, it says, no responsible party or occupant shall cause or let the unit become a public nuisance for purposes of this ordinance. Public nuisance as you stated earlier, that the tenant is part of this obligation here. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, as a landlord, I'm very fortunate, I've had very good tenants, and I adhere to the golden rule. I treat them as I want them to treat me, so I've been very blessed for 10 years. I've never had any issues. But I'm also thinking for other people that may have, that one bad apple as a tenant that creates a public nuisance situation. I don't really see any language that addresses that, other than it kind of comes back to the landlord, and it's almost their responsibility to address the situation. So I feel like there should be either some sort of, I don't know if,
A lease.
some sort of,
Wouldn't a lease cover that? The
well,
lease arrangements between
I
the
mean, I
tenant
guess,
and the landlord?
yeah, like going forward, you'd have to revise your lease to make sure that this would be incorporated in that, but depending on when this is implemented, there may be situations where people that have existing leases where, it'll take it's gonna be a little bit of a lag between the time that it's implemented and the people that have leases out there. So to understand like how those situations could be resolved, mediation or whatever, but I just feel like that's just another concern that you should maybe just consider. But yeah, I agree. So the lease would be obviously grounds for termination if they don't adhere to the town's. And that's similar with my condo. I have to, with the rules for the condo, I make sure that the tenants adhere to those
Right.
rules and regulations.
Mhm.
And then going on to section D, again, this kind of goes along with what I had said earlier. The one question I had was like defects, as section D, part 1, defects with increase beyond normal hazards. I'm trying to understand what defects are. The language there is a little vague as well. What would that mean?
So the language that we're referring to is right out of the statute, and,
Oh, I see, okay.
so, I mean, the challenge here is, we do this today, and, if we get a complaint, we're dealing with these exact issues. So what we're trying to do is codify our current practice in a way that is proactive enforcement. And with regards to 48A, that's the statute that gives us this authority. It's, the real challenge here is the bar for unfit for habitation is fairly high.
Okay.
And I think our practice speaks for itself. It's a very rare occasion where a unit would be deemed unfit for habitation and requiring the unit to be vacated. We work with the landlords and the property owners to move them towards compliance as soon as possible. The rare situation is lack of heat, lack of running water, gas leak or something else that needs immediate repair that puts the occupant at high risk. So the language is here, it mirrors the statute, but I don't think it should be viewed as this heavy-handed approach from the municipality. For those who've worked with our department on a regular basis, they understand our approach.
Okay, it sounds reasonable. I just, as I said, I just want some clarity just so I understand for my own. And I guess that kind of goes along with uncleanliness too. Again, this is sort of a tenant situation where, if they start dumping their tires out in the front yard or something like that, based on the way this ordinance is, that would be grounds for a fine. So again, that would
Tires are common.
kind of go back to the tenant. And then I guess moving on to section E, I did have a question about part F, which basically involves residents of Hanover getting a petition. So I guess it kind of, to me, it kind of smacks of like residents policing other residents, and I'm trying to understand the rationale for that language and that being put into
What are
that.
you referring to?
Page, so it'd be.
I'm sorry, part F under section 9.
This is the process established by statute. So in a situation, setting aside for a moment the registration process, if, for example, there's a property that has become a problem in the neighborhood, 10 residents have a mechanism in which they can seek an inspection and a hearing for occupancy compliance. And this is right out of the statute.
Does that apply to people that aren't renting as well?
No.
So I guess there's a double standard there too. I feel like that I'm not going to name locations, but I know there's a few areas that I would be concerned about. There's some houses in town that I wonder about
There are,
Suitability for habitation, I guess is the best way to put that. So I feel like there's almost a double standard there. If you're applying that for rentals, but there's other homes that may be in a similar circumstance.
understood. Unfortunately, in New Hampshire, as an owner, you can live in whatever condition you want inside your property.
So as soon as they decide to take on a renter though, then that all changes? it sounds
Correct.
like. Okay. All right. Understand. Okay, I'm just trying to get some clarity again, as I said. And then the final thing, which brings me to the very last section, and it's section F. I totally understand the reason for posting, and I agree with all that. The only thing that I do take exception to is that you must be available 24/7. I'm a father, you know, I have a family, and, you know, I think that's a little bit onerous, quite honestly, to have to be at the beck and call of, I don't know who, I mean, I guess it's, I mean, my tenant has my phone number, has my email and everything, so they're always able to reach out to me, but, you know, the language here of being reached 24/7, it kind of changes the whole, is that again something from a statute, or is that language that was put in by the?
So actually, it's a protocol that we need to have in place in case we have an unsafe housing condition and we need immediate attention to it, or we have an obligation to vacate the premises. So the goal is to have an owner or a responsible party that we can reach out to, put them on notice, we need an immediate action, and that's, you know, situations occur 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and they need to be remedied so that the people occupying the unit aren't put at risk.
I guess, well, I mean, I'm just trying to understand what in that situation, though, it almost seems like an emergency crew or somebody would be called in if something that dire, that what's the landlord gonna be able to do to?
So I will speak specifically to situations where, you know, if we have a small fire,
Right,
and the opportunity to address the deficiency or vacate the building is put forward. My expectation is the owner, if they can be reached, to try to remedy the situation. If there's a gas leak, the same situation will occur. We work with the property owners, and these are not issues that I've just put on the table. These are real issues that we've experienced in the recent past.
right.
And the ability to have direct contact, immediate contact, allows us to work to ensure people have a home, and they're not put out on the street, but they're safe. And that's the goal for this contact.
I see. But I guess I mean, if there's a situation like a fire, I mean, you know, obviously I would want to know.
You'd probably
about it.
want to call though, right?
Yeah, I would definitely want to call, but I guess.
So, I mean,
No,
we're
no,
only
it's
gonna
not
call
my-
you if it's
I
really
guess
bad.
I
You
guess
know, it's a
I'm-
really bad thing. We're only gonna call you if it's a really bad
Okay,
thing,
well, I guess-
right?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I
Okay.
just want to understand the boundaries, I guess
Yeah.
is the best way to put it.
I get it.
And so, yeah, okay, understood.
I mean, if you're getting a call from someone, that means one of our staff is out.
Right, no, but I mean, if it's a fire, I mean, I can't do anything about it. The fire department's going to have to do
Well,
something about it.
It's
So,
often an
And if
electrical
he doesn't get a call,
fire,
I mean,
Right.
come on.
but
Okay.
we've dealt with this specifically.
right, I mean, if it's electrical fire, it could be a faulty appliance or something too that somebody's used, so. Yeah, I guess that's, I mean, I hope that my comments kind of came fast and furious, but I hope that the board will at least take those into consideration when they revise this. And the only other question I have is like, as far as the time frame or the timeline for all the implementation of this, is there anything that's been mapped out, or what's the status on that?
So I can try to address it. Sure. So the goal here is to, once adopted, advertise a position, get that individual trained on the protocols, create a standard operation procedure manual, and then begin prioritizing our inspection program based on community risk, targeting the higher risk buildings first, which are basically multi-unit buildings, wood frame, unsprinklered, and then working our way through the tiers until we have all the properties inspected on a 3-year cycle. Once we get through that first 3-year cycle, I suspect we'll be back here with some recommended changes that would reshuffle the deck with a new prioritization based on what we found in the field.
So the manual you referred to, is that something that would be distributed to the landlords so that they understand what's required?
Sure.
Okay.
I mean, so We're in the process of, one of our versions had an inspection sheet.
Okay,
That inspection sheet will be an online document that we will use so that there's continuity across the board on all of our inspections, and that will be available in advance of any inspection.
fair enough.
And for the,
Is it fair to say, Rob,
6 months.
in the best world, we're looking at a 6 months
6
implementation
months,
period here?
yeah.
We're not,
Before this is
6 months.
implemented.
if we've been able to
So you'll have a
implement this
6-month
6 months from now, we
window.
will have done well.
So I can update my leases.
So, and with regards to how we notify landlords and property owners, not unlike the 13 effort and the 19-20 effort on other changes like solid waste, we do a mass mailing to every single property owner, giving them notice that if there is a rent, if they're managing or owning a rental, that there's an obligation to comply. We give them a link to the ordinance. We explain how they comply with a link to the application. And I have already made offers to do pre-inspections for any property owner who has a concern. Happy to come out and just walk you through what we'll be looking for. You know, some older buildings, windows are painted shut or screwed shut because they're loose and drafty. Those are the things we're going to be looking for. You know, doorknobs, locks that work or don't work, those are problematic, especially if I'm inside and the door doesn't unlock and I go to push against it. So each property is going to be different. It's not a cookie cutter approach. We'll be looking to address everything across the board so that it's safe and compliant.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Hopefully they were helpful.
Other public comment? Please.
My name's Philip Glushevich. I feel like I should introduce myself as Don Quixote, tilting against the Hanover windmills. I can do this one of three ways. I've printed this out. I'm happy to just give you a copy and stop there. I can read it, or I can sort of try to summarize it quickly.
It's your call. Whatever you feel appropriate.
All right, well, I guess I'll just try to summarize it, and then I can hand you a copy. Is that okay?
Sure.
So I've lived at 3 Prospect Street nearly 30 years. I'm opposed to the ordinance. A couple quick disclaimers. I don't want to impugn the motives of anybody who's drafted or supporting the ordinance. I was shocked to read about this for the first time a couple weeks ago in the Valley News. I feel like it's sort of a fait accompli that we're, going to have to swallow this. But I will also acknowledge that I don't follow town politics very closely, and so maybe it was, widely publicized, and you did say that there have been all kinds of efforts to communicate it to the residents. Although I have talked to a few people since I learned about it, and they have no idea this is coming. And it's not just people who are landlords, but anybody with a house who might decide to rent his house out for Dartmouth graduation or because he's going away for 3 months is potentially affected. And those people have no idea. So essentially everybody in Hanover is concerned by this ordinance, potentially. And I think the committee, the select board, has not done enough to make that widely known. I don't know how you go about doing that, but that's my 2 cents on that. I don't want any of my harsh comments to be misinterpreted. Just think of these as a counter argument and way to think about things. Patriotism is the last refuge of scoundrels, and safety is often a fig leaf for officials who want to justify policies that might not otherwise garner support. It's not clear to me whether the town is actually interested in tenant safety. I believe they are on some level. Or whether they're looking for another set of rules that they can use to make it harder for homeowners to rent out their properties in the first place. And that latter possibility is understandable given what's going on with Dartmouth and the expansion, et cetera. It's putting a lot of pressure on the town with the neighborhoods and so forth, so I'm sympathetic to that. In the FAQs, there's a comment about the town attorney has said that the only way to go about this is to have a ordinance that applies across the board to every potential rental property. It would be nice to have the town attorney justify that, or maybe that is self-evident, but do we have to take that as a given? Might a different attorney interpret that statute differently? And the reason I bring this up is because it seems to me there's a huge difference between an owner-occupied residence, like mine, where I live and have an upstairs apartment, where I'm going to be very interested in making sure that things are safe, because I don't want to have my house burned down by a tenant any more than the fire department or the zoning people do. And residences that are not occupied, not owner-occupied. And if the town attorney's advice is unassailable, i.e. that you have to have a blanket application of this ordinance, then I would respectfully suggest that this ordinance will give rise to a bureaucratic nightmare that could overwhelm town resources and stoke a lot of resentment and divisiveness. We're already chafing under what I would call arbitrary zoning regulations that defy common sense a lot of times. And I won't go into all the details of my house, but I bought a house in '94. It was 4 units, rental units. My family and I moved into the first 2 floors, and we continued to rent the top floor out, as we're allowed to do. But I can now no longer go back to making it a 4-unit rental property because of lot size requirements. And there's really no rational reason why lot size should be dispositive on a rental property. And my immediate neighbor is same size house, and it's an inpatient mental health residence with people coming and going. Tractor trailers come backing up, delivering food, 6, 7 in the morning, beep, 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 that whole thing. The next house over on Allen Street, also similar in size to my house, is a Jewish center with people coming and going. I have no problem with either of these facilities. I have a lot more problems with the house 3 doors down on Allen Street, which is rented out to Dartmouth students who seem to require a verbal beatdown at the start of every school year or summer term. My point is that even when you try to come up with a fair regulation, it's going to be unfair to someone. The safety ordinance has a lot of vague language, unreasonably dangerous, injurious, and so forth. Now I understand that you're going to try to do this in a reasonable way. With all due respect, I don't have a lot of faith that town officials will always be reasonable. I don't want to name names, but I had a conversation with somebody who's a well-known builder in the town, well-respected, who explained how I believe it's a former town official, would interpret zoning regulations in ways that were simply not supported by the texts. And then just lastly, I have a bunch of questions that are rhetorical. If the inspectors have to scrutinize every rental property and then return to verify that the prescribed changes were made, how long is that going to take? If a homeowner suddenly finds that she has to leave town for work or other reasons and wants to rent her house, how long will it take to get through an inspection? If an inspector quits to find another job, are you going to be able to find a replacement easily? Are homeowners going to challenge an adverse ruling and tie up town resources? Will deep-pocketed investors, and I am not one, resort to litigation in the event of an adverse ruling? While we're at it, maybe we should introduce a Texas-style bounty where residents can rat out their neighbors for having non-complying rental properties. Actually, in Hanover, I think there's plenty of neighbors who will take that task on for free. Finally, as I said, I've spoken to several people who have no idea this is coming. And I think you're going to have to figure out a way to do a better job of getting the word out to the town. And, nobody wants to argue against safety, myself included. But I think this is going to create a lot of headaches for property owners and the town. And until it can be demonstrated that there's a compelling need, I think you should vote to reject the ordinance. And I'll just end with saying that there's a huge difference between the houses that are full of Dartmouth students, which I'm guessing is 9/10 of the houses that you mentioned that are substandard and have those comments that the manager here cited, and owner-occupied residences that are well-maintained. So that's my 2 cents. Can I?
Thank you.
I'll just let you pass this.
Laura, you want to address some of those issues?
Certainly,
Introduce yourself, please.
certainly. Good evening, Laura Spector-Morgan, one of the town's attorneys who's been working with staff on drafting this ordinance. I did opine, in fact, that the ordinance has to be generally applicable to rental units, and that is true. In order to differentiate between different types of properties, you need to have a rational basis. And there is no rational basis that I'm aware of that would allow the town to differentiate between student rentals and other rentals. Could you differentiate between rental of rooms in owner-occupied properties and other rentals? Absolutely, but you're equally free to regulate both. The statute is exceedingly clear that it cannot be used to impose additional requirements on short-term rentals. So short-term rentals will only have to comply with the same regulations as everyone else, and that's in the interest of safety, because as people are coming in to stay in your house for a weekend or a week, they don't necessarily know where all the exits and fire extinguishers and safety equipment is. And I hear that a lot from fire chiefs in my many towns who are dealing with short-term rental problems. And finally, Byrne, as I think you all know at least, has been doing this for years. And when it adopted its ordinance, there was a similar objection from many in the community, including the Durham Landlords Association. But I think anyone who wants to contact any of the landlords in Durham will find that the inspection program has been an overwhelming success. There have not been, hordes and hordes of buildings that have been ordered to be vacated. But instead, we now have safer rental units with things like smoke detectors that can't necessarily be removed. Everyone's got their egress window, and it helps the town make sure that students, who can be a particularly vulnerable population, are able to have those added protections of having another level review the rental housing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment? David?
Hello. My name is David Millman. I am a senior undergraduate and the Dartmouth College's student body president. First, I just want to thank the select board, the town manager, town staff for all the hard work that's gone into making this ordinance and working on the revisions. I do really appreciate it, coming from the perspective of a student that's heard so much about rental units and the quality of them. It's part of the reason why I was very willing to conduct those interviews and sort of hear from students about their perspectives. So I wanted to say that I really do support the general sense of the ordinance. I just had two questions, particularly one around in the frequently asked questions document on August 12th, the second point about if the tenant has to vacate, that the town will be in contact with the responsible party and will work to find suitable alternative temporary housing for tenants. I totally, I think that's very necessary for if the dwelling unit is vacated because of unsafe condition, students need to have a place to go. But I don't see that anywhere in the language of the ordinance, that the landlord is responsible for providing temporary housing. So I just wanted to make sure I'm not misreading it or missing that, but I think that if it is not included in the text, I would urge that it would be. Just because I think it's really important that, something that's in the frequently asked questions document doesn't necessarily mean that it's, law, obviously. So that's one point about the alternative housing, because, something that I discovered through all the interviews is that, and this is just common knowledge from the entire student body, is that the fire standards when it pertains to overcrowding are not really followed when it comes to renting out units. So, there are commonly more than 3 people unrelated that occupy a dwelling unit, which is part of the reason why I think it's really important to have that alternative housing, because just based on my reading of it, and it could be wrong, but if unfit for human habitation includes overcrowding and not adhering to the fire safety rules, then that would mean that if a student maybe after an inspection enters into an agreement to rent a unit, and this person has more than 3 people with them, and there's some condition that's faulty, they could be worried about reporting or being honest with the town, because they don't know where they're going to go if they report it. So that's just one point. And then the other one I had was around in section 8 with administration and enforcement, that the 24-hour notice to the responsible party, who will then notify the occupant. I was just wondering if there's any way to enforce that, like whether, because I think there's definitely, a concern that students want to be, or anybody that's occupying a rental unit want to be aware that they're going to have the place inspected. And so those are just 2 broader points. I think the more important one is the alternative housing, making that codified in the language that landlords can have to work with the town to find suitable or living arrangements. I do think there's just to state, in terms of tenant education, I'm more than willing to help disseminate any information, work with the college to give information to occupants. And I do also want to say that given what I know about the adherence to the overcrowding, that there's a potential, I'm not sure if it's, obviously I can't say for certain, but there's a potential for a decrease in the rental availability in the town if landlords start adhering to the 3-person rule, and so that throughout the year and in the future that trying to work on easing some of the zoning laws and allowing for more construction. But that's all I have. So thank you. Is there any, just to clarify, is there any with the suitable living arrangements, is that in the language, or did I miss something in that, or is that?
No, it's my understanding that we cannot require the landlord to provide alternative housing.
Okay.
That's not within our prerogative.
Okay.
We can encourage it, but we cannot require it. It's not within our prerogative.
Okay, so it would be possible if.
And you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
One of the potential concepts, we hope that this will educate students, educate landlords, because we do plan to better enforce the housing limits.
Mhm.
And that will create less rental units in Hanover. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
And we also are committed, the best we can, working with a college to increase student housing on campus and rental opportunities in Hanover. But I think you're absolutely right. One of the consequences of this will be students need to understand, and landlords need to understand, that we now have a basis on which to enforce the limits.
existing rules.
The existing rules.
The
Existing
existing law
rules.
that has been voted in by all of the townspeople.
Yeah,
So this is basically giving more teeth
yeah.
to make sure we have safe housing.
Yeah. I just think that a concern of mine is that if students are in a unit and they don't know whether they're gonna, if they have to vacate the dwelling unit, they might be unwilling to sort of cooperate or, contact the department, because they don't know if they'd rather have unsafe housing than no housing.
You've just described why a complaint-driven ordinance didn't work.
Yeah.
So we've had to move one step beyond that.
And why we need this one.
Okay,
Thank you. Thank you, David. Others? Board, are we prepared to act? Cory?
Kari Asmus of Etna, and I know you've seen me so many times, and I really wanted to give anybody else a chance to speak first. So I'm wondering, you know, if anybody wants to change their mind and go first, I'm happy to give up my seat. Okay. So I guess where do I start? But the first one that I was really interested in, and I've asked staff for clarification, is, let me find it, I know it's not jumping out at me. Oh, okay, so in, I guess, Article 7, Section B, where it says, following the issuance of an interim COC or receipt of a renewal application, the department will inspect the unit, including all areas that impact egress and common areas where applicable. And again, I was just hoping to figure out where applicable is, because I think we heard one evening from somebody who owns an apartment complex. And so that owner is in charge of the egress and everything else. But if you own a condominium, and we talked about this, that the common areas I have no control over. And at that meeting, I heard that the inspection would only be for the unit. And since we had that conversation, this language is new. So I'm wondering where applicable, if that applies to common areas in a condominium situation.
If the common areas are part of the accessible route required by code, they would need to be inspected. If there were a deficiency, we would reach out to the entity responsible, the homeowners association or the condominium organization, to manage the compliance. If it's a deficiency, regardless of who's the owner, it needs to be corrected.
Okay, that's fine, and I appreciate the clarification. And I just wanted to go back then to Article 4, definitions, responsible party. And I know I've said this several times, but you know, an individual identified as the primary contact, and if it's the common area, so there's no one, when you have a condominium, there's no one primary contact. If it's a common area, you know, the vestibule, the hallway, the whatever, that's one responsible party. If it's up in the unit, that would be another responsible party. So I just want to say that you're not working in a situation where there's only one responsible party.
We deal with this routinely, and I'm not sure that we need clarification. We understand.
Okay. But it just was where applicable. I didn't know where it would not be applicable, that you would be checking egresses. It just seems like it's everywhere, but yeah, but again, there's not one primary contact.
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. I also wanted to know, and I had this question, is if owner or a responsible party disagrees with a violation that they've received, what is the appeal process?
I think it's pretty explicitly stated.
Pardon me?
I think it is explicitly stated. They have regress to the select board.
Okay, that's
Yep.
what I was wondering, because that section talks about it being an appeal if you have received an order that your dwelling is completely unfit for habitation, as opposed to a violation. But if you're saying a violation and an order are interchangeable, that's great, and we've said that tonight, and now I understand that, and hopefully everybody in the room will understand that that is the process. It just, again, following the language wasn't absolutely crystal clear, but
Yes.
now,
Pretty crystal clear.
no, it's.
And we did update the language,
Yep.
Rob and I, we did add, so in G, where it says if a responsible
By
party is
any
agreed by
order.
an order, we changed that to any order to make it a little, an order is not capitalized, to try to
department.
make it more
So
clear.
anything they say
All right.
goes, you can appeal it.
Yeah,
So we, yeah, we did try to,
You did try to do
Yeah.
that, which, I mean, sorry, which?
It's on page five, G,
Right, okay,
first
but-
sentence.
Right, and I did just underline order, because, again, previously was discussed as a violation, but if.
But this gives you more, like, if you don't like what they say, you can
Yeah,
appeal
that's-
it,
That's
anything.
fine, and now that I know that there's an appeal process, I just wasn't sure what it was. So that's, I appreciate.
Does that make sense
That
to you?
clarification. If you all are willing to serve as a board of appeal for violations, then, then I thank you, in advance, should people want to avail themselves of that, I have to say, based on, some of the other comments tonight, that were brought up, and I have to say, I want to thank our attorney for coming this evening, because I know that, there have been questions, about the potential of this, of a rental ordinance going back to about 2002, I think. And so it has been an interest of people for a long time. And tonight, and I'm probably going to have a hard time finding it on the spot, but one of the people who spoke talked about how when there's a petition with 10 people who sign, that it, that a unit owner, which we know from the definition means a rental, can have their place declared unfit for human habitation. And the answer that he was given was that, yes, that's what the RSA says, and people who own their own homes can live however they want. However, if you do check with RSA 48A, the language there is not a unit, it's a dwelling, and the definition of a dwelling is any building or structure that's used for human, intended to be used for human habitation. So that is one instance where the statute would allow you, if you wanted to have the petition by 10 people, that could apply to any dwelling in Hanover. It doesn't have to apply to only rentals. You've only chosen to have it apply to rentals. And I would say that if since our attorney is here, if she disagrees, with that, I'd be happy to point out where it says a dwelling, not a unit, in 48A. But I think that people need to understand that there are choices that the select board is making, and that you deem this to be the priority, but there were other options, and that's just not what you've chosen to do. I also was interested in the student's comment on the 24-hour notice, where the responsible party is told, and then they tell the student, and hopefully it would be more than 24 hours. But that is another place where in the statute, and you may remember in one of that early draft in June, at that time, the language was taken from RSA 48A, where it said that the inspection would be held causing the least inconvenience to the occupant of the unit. And so the intent of the ordinance is not that the town decides this is when it's going to be, we give you 24-hour notice, and the occupant, who maybe is in the middle of finals week and doesn't need somebody right then coming in and, checking
But I
whatever's
think-
going to be checked.
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
Because I think and maybe I misunderstood, I mean, the 24/7 being available on call was like in case of an emergency.
No, I'm talking.
And then the other thing was, then there's the inspection,
Yes.
so there's two different times where there's a 24-hour.
Right, and what the 24 hours that I was referring to, and I'm sorry, it's going to take me longer to find it, but because it was already discussed and referenced, I'm hoping by Mr. Millman, where he brought up the question about the notification really that the tenant receives.
Okay, then I misunderstood.
And the statute.
I got it.
I agree with you. We worked hard to make the responsible party responsible.
Oh, right, but the
And
point is.
that's where we start.
Right,
We
but
start with the responsible party, and it goes down from there.
Right, so if the statute says that the visit should be arranged basically to respect the tenant's, right to privacy, et cetera, shouldn't we, and it uses the word shall. I mean, when I first moved to town as a 30-something-year-old, I was a tenant, I rented. And I'm not really sure that I would have been wild about having somebody come and inspect. And if you look at the list, whether it's my bed sheets, whether I've taken out the garbage, what my bathroom looks like, I mean, I feel like I need to clean before anybody comes. And, and I just feel that if the statute says that the inspection shall be arranged to cause the least inconvenience to the tenant, that maybe that's something that we should adhere to a little more closely than we are, given that that's a provision in the statute. And I think
We also had a lot of feedback, is what do those words mean?
Pardon me?
We had a lot of feedback, what do those words mean? What do those words mean? And
Yes.
we opted to remove them and just responsible party. So I agree, that was a conscious decision.
Yeah, okay. And there might be a better way to balance things than what you found. And it was just brought up tonight. I would just say, finally, and I, as you know, could go on, and I have sent a compilation of my concerns to both the gentlemen here, our administrators. But now that you have brought up, that 24/7 availability, I have to say, so I'm, sort of not a landlord because it's something that I always thought I was going to do. It was buying a condominium because of a family need, and then realizing, oh, Kari, you're not that young anymore. This might be your plan B. So I want to hold on to it, and I'm not really looking forward to going from a non-arm's length landlord situation to an arm's length. So I'm already feeling kind of daunted about that. And then when I read that even though, if there's a fire or whatever, we have the association and a lot of things can be taken care of that way, and we have the alarm system that's tested and everything else. I'm kind of this conscientious person that if you tell me I need to be available 24/7, I feel that. And so, because of this, I've looked into, okay, so do I get a management company? Because I'd like to keep this place for myself. And that's going to add about $160 a month. My whole idea is that, I'd like to do my little part to make this kind of a more affordable unit. And, a comment was made at a previous meeting that you just don't know what unintended consequences this may have. And to the extent that it drives a small or more than one landowner to say, I've got to get a management company now, that adds significantly more than $8 a month. Maybe there aren't a lot of people like me, but what I've mentioned to our staff is that, at Brook Hollow, where you can have a maximum of 2 unrelated people, and there is 1 parking spot dedicated for that unit, you don't buy there because you're trying to maximize a return on investment. That's just not how it. Yeah, I mean, if you want to maximize your investment, you buy someplace else. So I know a class of landowners or condominium owners that, they're just motivated differently, and I'm not really sure how this ordinance will push them. And again, I guess I wish that. That we could see an ordinance that tries harder to do what the last ordinance did, where you do have a dedicated staff member who just works on rental issues and focuses on where there's been complaints, where there've been safety issues. The RSA talks of, about, if the staff suspects. I feel that the last ordinance wasn't ever given a fair shot because a dedicated person who, was completely faithful to that task, but was never hired. So I feel that that option never was given a fair chance, and I think it's a real loss that you want to switch to this now. So anyway, again, compilation of concerns has been sent off. If I have said anything tonight that our attorney disagrees with, I hope she will correct me. And again, I do appreciate that you've all put in, our staff included, a lot of effort into this, and that I think that everybody here, it shares the same goals. It's just how do we get there?
Thank you. Any additional public comment? If not, oh, please.
Hi, Sue Reed, renter on West Wheelock Street. I don't have anything major to say. I sent some typos to Rob, so he's been catching up on those, and there are a few more to catch. But I just thought I would speak up as a renter who's rented here in Hanover for 30 years from the same landlady who inherited the place and does not live in town and takes terrible care of it. So I think having an ordinance with some teeth in it, even if they are small teeth, is a good thing. And she's aware that this is coming up, and it may help. It may help with some of the rotted beams and other problems that we're having. So thank you for working on the ordinance.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sue.
Well, I'd love to close the public hearing on that note. Anyone else like to speak? If not, board, any questions or additional discussion? I move that we adopt the rental housing ordinance number, I should know this number by heart. 42. Do I hear a second to that motion?
So second.
Further comments? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. It passes unanimously. Thank you, Rob, thank you, Alex, thank you for everyone that's worked on this. What a journey, and believe it or not, now the work begins. Now the work begins. Okay, we'll wait.
Someone sent that to me.
Okay.
Here. Someone just sent that to me. He's watching TV. No, I mean, you gave them to us, we'll just stick them in our file, unless you want, do you want to keep them? I mean,
Yeah, I should grab the conflict of
Yeah, you go ahead and do that.
That's a good point, we'll look into that, that's a good point. No.
it's never too
Nothing's
late, it's a working document.
We're working on it. Okay.
So this was just adopted?
We just adopted it.
And so, I was under the impression it was still being discussed, but I guess that's not the case.
Well, we've had several public hearings, there's a lot of others still, so at some point in time, we need to act, and we have acted.
All right, well, okay, and I can tell you right now that my in-law apartment, I'm gonna be taking that off the market, so we may have ended up constraining supply even further by some of the decisions here, so.
Why don't you reach out to myself or our planning director, and if you have concerns that we can address.
Well, I thought I was expressing them today, but if it's already been adopted, it's a.
Okay, we'll take this offline.
No,
Thank you.
no, that's okay, thanks.
All right, what's left?
The other thing I was gonna say but didn't, is the only way to stop Christie from making changes to adopt
Well, I
it.
mean, yeah,
Anyway, well done, well done.
I'm not sure everybody knows how many iterations we went through and how much time we spent.
Okay.
But I do think that, I mean, I think that there's been, you know, we've had 3 or 4 select board meetings this year on this subject, like this fall, since you've been here, Alex, but we have had them ever since I joined the board in 2013.
Yeah.
That we've been talking about this rental housing unit, and we've had issues with, I mean, people want to put their stuff on Airbnb, and that's not allowed. Now it can be allowed, I mean, with this rental housing ordinance. So, I don't know. It's not going to be perfect, and we'll adjust it accordingly if we need to. So,
Work begins.
yeah.
Okay, the next order of business is to set the polling hours for Tuesday, November 8th,
How about if we do them from like 9 to 10?
9 to 10 in the morning. I don't think that's going to work. How about
Speed
7?
voting?
Yeah.
He's joking. How about, was it 7 to 7
7 to 7 at the high school,
at the high school?
November 8th.
November 8th. Why don't we take that motion and I'll have some discussion.
I'll move that.
Set the polling hours.
What happened to my
for
motion?
You did.
Oh, okay, I'll second it. I'm sorry, Athos. I didn't want to step on your toes.
No, I never made that motion, I made a different one. I retract my motion.
He takes his motion back. There's no second, so nobody has to accept the
No one
retraction.
seconded you.
We're all a little giddy now. Okay, so the motion is to set the polling hours from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. on November 8th, 2022. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
They are set. Now, I do have we've got some ballot clerks to work on, but Alex, have we made any progress on who has to be there and what our alternatives
Oh,
are?
yeah.
I do not have an update about that, but I will get some more information from our
Would you
clerk.
please?
I thought the moderator said that we had, they were happy with, the state was happy with
The way it was.
the way it was, where it was just one person every, you know, there was a select board member always present.
I will ask
Isn't that what
about
Jeremy said?
No, I don't, I wish he had, but I
Oh.
don't think so. He did give us a back door in the form of appointing or somehow appointing people to be in our stead who would have to be trained and understand the responsibilities. But I think we need to try to get out of the craziness of what we thought we had to do last time. So my question is, have we made any progress? And the answer is not quite yet.
I will
But I think
ask
we
you
need
some
to clarify it.
information,
My
So
re-
the issue was, yeah, tell us,
My reading of and we just got the election laws again, and I looked at them again. And what's that big? But then what pertains to us is like 2 paragraphs. And if you look in the index at least, and
Okay, clearly, Athos, and you've stated this before, you disagree with the way it's been interpreted
Yeah.
by Jeremy. So that's, if you have 2 paragraphs to look at, they should, Jeremy, we need to make sure Jeremy is looking at those
I think
adequately.
he looked at them and he interpreted it differently than I did.
Yeah, and unfortunately, yes, okay, so we need to work on this a little bit more before November 8th, because it's, what we think we need to do is not, has no value add, let's put it that way.
Sure.
Alex,
We've
our
always-
goal is one of us at a time.
Right, and three of us for the signing, for the actual
Right.
submittal.
But the preference is, the hope is one person at a time,
Correct.
and then a quorum
Quorum
signing.
to
Yes,
sign.
Okay,
That has been our practice, and hopefully we can get back to it.
okay.
Bill?
That has been the practice as far back as I can remember.
Yes.
This time, we were strongly recommended, and we just followed the recommendation, is that 3 of us were there at 7 a.m. twiddling our thumbs, and then looking at each other, and it was a total waste of time. And if that's a state statute, well, then we'll fulfill it, but it seems to be an interpretation that we only need 1 per 7 a.m. to 7 p. But at night, when all the votes are counted, we do understand there should be 3 of us there, which has been, again, the practice for decades. So we just need to clarify.
One there all the time, a quorum for the final signing. That's our hope. So I think we need to look into that more, let's do it. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, we have appointment of ballot clerks. and you've given us a list of ballot clerks to approve. I'll find it here in a second.
Do you have enough?
Yeah, these look like a smaller number, Alex.
These are just add-ons.
Add-ons
That's
to
what-
what
that's
we
what I
had
was
at
hoping.
the primary, okay.
We voted on all the rest of them the last time for both meetings. That was our hope.
These are additional folks beyond the prior list.
Yay.
Excellent.
That's what we were hoping
Okay.
for.
So I move that this wonderful list of additional folks be added to the list of,
Existing folks.
existing list
You
of
can shut the door if it's too noisy.
ballot clerks.
Second.
Excellent. Further discussion, now that we've clarified that. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
I think it's important to note that we just added 20
Yep.
people to a list that I think is already 60.
Yeah.
And I think that it's important that everyone knows in the viewing audience that it takes that many volunteers to host the elections at Hanover High School for one day. So
And it's
for-
a lot of fun, and you do really good work.
It's really good work and it's a great way to engage in the community, but it's just important to know that it's not like a half a dozen people running
No,
the
not at
election,
all.
that it takes a lot of people and we really appreciate the volunteers.
It takes a lot of organization, it takes a lot of training.
Yep.
Takes a lot to run a
But
good election.
we can still have more volunteers, so.
Always, always. Okay, so thank you for the additional volunteers.
Wait, do we vote?
We did.
Okay.
Appointment of treasurer. Alex, you want to see this one
So,
up?
yeah, that's a position we have to have. Our finance director was that person before, so we have another finance staff will be the treasurer, at least for the time being.
Okay, who are
That's
you,
what this is.
and who are you? wanting to
That is
appoint?
Karen McCusker, who works in the finance office, who's our finance manager.
So I move that we appoint her as treasurer.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Reclassification of the job position for the finance director.
So we are asking for an approval, basically the job previously, so the history is that we had one person who played, as you all know, but maybe for members of the public, that we had one person who played multiple different roles, who was the town clerk, the finance director, and the administrative services director. And we were fortunate to have someone who was able to do all of that. But also, as we don't have someone playing all of those roles, we have to sort of disentangle that a little bit. And one piece has sort of happened, the clerk and administrative services, although we might want to bring some of that actually back together in the future, but the finance director really is a separate position. There's separate staff, separate responsibilities, separate departments completely. And so the idea, so basically we're asking for the select board to approve moving the position down one grade from 26 to 25 in our classification system. And then the person will be directly responsible for the two finance staff and the finance department operations. And then the hope is that in the future, we will be able to find a full-time town clerk who would oversee the administrative services, which more traditionally fall under clerk.
Okay. And we've received from our HR department justification and for all of this, and we've had that in our, that was in the package that was made available.
Yes.
Okay, so, did we have a
I
motion?
move we reclassify the finance director job position as described.
I'll second.
Bill seconds. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
October 3rd.
Minutes of October 3rd, I had no additions or corrections.
I did.
Oh, good. Please.
I feel like it is not clear to anyone who reads the minutes as to why we recessed the meeting. And I think we should be clear, saying that, due to offensive language and animated behavior or whatever from the person speaking, that we recessed. I mean, it was offensive,
it was clearly-
aggressive language.
It
that-
clearly caught my attention as well. I assumed that was a conscious decision talked about with Laura, about how to describe or not describe that from a legal perspective.
It's on television.
Hmm?
It was on
I
know.
know, I'm just saying, but how to describe it in language is a part of the minutes.
Yes, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Ethel.
I as well noticed it, how it was written, how straightforward it was. I did not
Okay.
I couldn't think of the utility of describing it otherwise, the advantage of describing it otherwise.
So,
Well, there was a person sitting at the desk swearing at us in an aggressive manner. It was on television. He would not leave the room when asked.
Correct.
And so we recessed the meeting. That is not in the minutes whatsoever. So is there
suggest we
no,
not adopt these minutes tonight and ask that
Sure.
that be
Yeah.
corrected?
I can work on that and put some,
Yeah.
I can work with our
I
attorney.
mean, it
I think it
doesn't-
won't be that complicated to put
no,
the
I
language
don't
in.
think it, I mean, and maybe it's not offensive to other people. It was offensive to me. Maybe that's
No,
an
no.
opinion, but,
Well, that, not to belittle or make that point glib, that I think subjectivity is what we need to eliminate from this.
exactly.
And that's where we can get.
There's very
Yeah.
clear state law about what governing bodies are able to do and not do with members of the public in public buildings during a public meeting. We follow the procedure that our attorney has outlined, it's consistent with state law. We can put that right in there.
I would like that in here,
Yeah,
just
yeah.
so it's clear.
I'll work with Laura on doing that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So why don't we, what's the right word? Not actually.
Table.
Let's table those minutes
Table.
then.
Are there any other comments about these minutes? Thank you,
Where are
Sharon.
we now?
Thank you, Sharon. Administrative report.
Okay. Let's see here. So we got a couple things to update on. So the first is an HR and staffing update, as I'm doing every month. Wanted to let folks know how many people have left employment and started employment with the town. So we did have 3 employees leave employment and 5 begin. And so we wanted to welcome Brittany, James, Helder, Brandon, and Jerry to Hanover Parks and Rec, Public Works, Fire, and Assessing. Also, I included in my report a link to a short article that I wrote with some reflections after meeting with a bunch of other town managers about a month ago, talking about some of the hiring, recruitment, and retention challenges. So if you do want to find that, there is a link to that in the report. And we are going to be meeting on a monthly basis. I think next week is our next meeting. And I think we've got about maybe 20 managers who are interested in attending. So I'm excited that that group is sort of coming together. And we've been sharing some interesting stuff. I think that will be pretty valuable, especially in the long run. Especially as it sounds like there's going to be times, and there is one right now, where another nearby town is hiring for the same position we are, and we should be able to talk and there shouldn't be a weird competitive dynamic there. And perhaps there's opportunities for collaboration that we hadn't thought about. So an update on our finance director search and sort of the budget, which I kind of morphed into one thing here. I can provide a very high-level update on the hiring, and we'll talk about that in a little more detail in non-public session. But on broad terms, we did post the job posting about a week ago. It's on our website. We're sending it out to kind of various lists, putting it on LinkedIn, some other places, trying to get creative. We have had a number of applications, including a number of qualified applications. And we are taking those on a rolling basis, and so we are scheduling interviews this week, the first round, and we're moving very quickly to try and identify. We're not going to rush, but we also don't want to wait. So that, of course, fine line between those two things. And we're, we also, for this job, we created sort of a more visual brochure for it, which I think is something we'll probably do in the future as well. Just kind of makes it a little more eye-catching. We're working with a couple other organizations on developing some videos. So like, recruiting people to come work for Hanover, one of the big selling points of that is that you get to come live in the Upper Valley. And so how do we talk about the Upper Valley generally and when we're trying to recruit for a job? And so we're working with a couple other stakeholders like Vital Communities, CATV, Upper Valley Business Alliance, and hopefully we will have some video content sort of highlighting what life is like in the Upper Valley. And so that would be a really great way, because it's a huge selling point, obviously, moving up here, and like, let's make sure, even a picture doesn't do it justice. We're a very photogenic region. And
Especially this time of year.
Yeah, that's true, especially the last couple weeks. So we just want to sort of, we're just trying to hit on all these different pieces. Of course, thinking about compensation, benefits, things like that, very important, but also things as simple as this, kind of important as well. So anyway, the finance director search ongoing, rolling basis, we're hoping to kind of move quickly there. And what we were planning on doing was sort of kicking off the budget conversations in the first meeting in November. That's not going to be able to happen. We were meeting with the finance committee earlier today to kind of update on that a little bit. In a week or two, I think we're going to know a lot more, because basically the way that I'm sort of conceptualizing it is we're either going to bring somebody in soon, you know, and that soon might be 4 weeks, 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks at the kind of longer end of that, or it's not going to be soon. And we're going to sort of make a flow chart here, and if it looks soon, we'll be able to follow a somewhat similar budget path. It's just going to be compressed a bit. And if we don't have, you know, if we don't have any prospects and we're not really sure what's going to happen next, then we need to sort of move into a backup plan. And we do have some options there, looking at finance consultants that companies do offer. I've worked with people like that before. I would of course end up in that sort of scenario shelving a few projects that I'm working on and being much more hands-on the budget, which is something I have done before, although I was looking forward to not being quite that hands-on this year. So, you know, we've got a few different options no matter which direction we go. It'll look a little different than what we were intending, you know, and it'll either look a little different or very different. I think we'll know in a couple weeks based on how these interviews go this week and how many more applications we do or don't get. So I will keep the board updated about that. And, you know, hopefully we can begin the budget process maybe just kind of a month late, or 6 weeks late, and still be able to do most of the stuff we want to do.
Let me break in a little bit.
Yeah,
the
sorry.
public should go and view the promotion material, the job description, and the work that went into putting together a package to attract a finance director, because it's a very unique, very enlightened, a very different approach than you would have seen 2 years ago. So anyway, I just congratulate you on that, and I think people should just go and enjoy it.
Yeah.
Because it's
good.
fun and it's good.
It's good.
And it's different, and so thank you for that.
And we've gotten, you know, sending it around, we've gotten some good feedback about it, so I appreciate those comments. I mean, and if people are interested, there's a quick video, if you're not tired of hearing me talk, a couple minutes sharing why I came here, and hopefully prompting people to think about why they might want to come here too. So
You
that's
might
it.
end up applying for the job.
Right. So I think that's also just it's a taste of what's to come as we try to ramp up, you know, in this area a little bit here. And so working with our human resources department has been really great. Like we've got a lot of kind of short, medium, long-term stuff here. On a related note, I believe we have a memo in our packet from Dave Stewart, our HR director, about a salary study update, which is that we are moving along. We did take the feedback from some select board members previously about what towns were included and what weren't, and there were a couple additional towns added that hopefully will, provide a better representation of who worked. I think now it's 15 towns altogether that we're going to be looking at, comparing ourselves directly to. So that should be good data. We're probably about halfway through the process. We have we're working on a survey for our employees. That data is going to kind of go into the study as well. So that's something that hopefully will come out this week. And all of this needs to be basically done before we begin our collective bargaining unit negotiations. And so we look to have the study done in November, the results presented and discussed here, and then I imagine we'll move very quickly into working with our collective bargaining units. I did include some election updates from our town clerk, and so there is still time to register to vote. I just did myself last week, so you can still do it. We've got a little bit of time left. You can do it in town hall between 8:30 and 4:30. There are Dartmouth College registration drives, and it looks like there was one today, and there's one on October 27th. You can check out the packet, and you can also go to our website. We have all this information there. If you have any questions, you can email our town clerk at townclerk@hanovernh.org. Next is a rental housing update, which is now moot. I guess the update is that the ordinance was passed, and we will begin working on the administrative regulations, and we'll begin working on figuring out the hiring. And I also have a list of some of the comments from tonight, and so if we come back, as I am sure we will at some point, and say, we're gonna make an update, I found one typo while we were talking about it also, is, let's just keep that list, and if we can clarify things in the future, why not? And so Rob and I will kind of keep that in a file somewhere. Next is an update on community and economic development. We are having a kind of small working group meeting. If anybody's interested in attending that, please email me. It's really predominantly for business owners. I think there's going to be a few other stakeholders from the college that will be there as well. But trying to put a bunch of different business owners that I've met with so far together to talk about kind of downtown Hanover. So I'm really excited for that. And again, if you want more information about that or want to participate in that process, just email me, alex.torpy@hanovernh.org. Next is sort of this civics update. We are making progress, and next week we'll hopefully finalize some details about the civic leadership program that we're working on at the high school, where we are intending to have high school students involved in helping facilitate and participate in conversations about housing and other kind of land use related issues next spring. And so we're really excited about that. I have gotten really positive feedback from a lot of stakeholder groups in the region about the sort of value, especially for not just us in bringing them into our conversations, but the value for them in participating in this and sort of learning firsthand, getting to see government and not the sort of Washington DC government, which sure is fine, but really we know, I think a lot of the exciting stuff happens at the local level, but a lot of people, that's not what's on the news, that's not what's on social media, so big opportunity there. And I think that's it for now. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Very quick question. How does it happen when you're introducing us to the people who are joining the town? You don't use their last names? You just listed them.
Yes.
No.
Yeah.
Why not?
I don't know.
It feels to me to be more respectful to them and to kind of thank them and welcome them if somebody is named, I'm making up a name, Brittany Miller.
Right.
Has joined in recreation, and Tom Jones has joined in, DPW or something like that.
Yeah, we could do that. I don't think I even did the names. I think that was just last time. I said, well, might as well include the names if we're doing it, and I just threw in the first names, but
You
yeah, we
did,
could do that.
and it just sounds like a bunch of.
We're an informal group here, but, I'm happy to,
Good, he'll take that under advisement.
yeah, I don't think they would have any issues with it, but I can sort of ask our HR if there's any issue with it, and I don't see any reason why not.
It feels more respectful to me.
Okay. I will look into that. Yeah.
Selectboard reports, Joanna.
Yes, the Hanover Bike Walk Group is hosting another walk and roll event on Saturday. I think it's October 29th, it's the Saturday, and it is in the Dresden neighborhood. And there's a number of Dresden families who are volunteering, and then a number of the Bike and Walk Committee members are gonna be out there. They're gonna close off part of the road and have activities to just let the kids ride their bikes and walk and roll. That's like the skating.
Good.
So they're just trying to educate small kids about the safety and biking and walking. So that's on the 29th. The Sustainability Master Plan Committee met last Tuesday. We spent a bunch of time reviewing feedback from on the vision statement, which is in draft form. It's got 8 parts to it. It is posted on the website. It's this master plan effort is very comprehensive, and the goals are very, I would say, aspirational, and covers a lot more than your traditional master plan. And we are anxiously, so the vision statement and the community profile are, the community profile is online. The vision statement's online and still is in draft form, and we figure we'll be tweaking it right up until the end because of community feedback. We anticipate within the next couple weeks, getting some more content, the chapters of the 8 like goals within the vision statement are the 8 chapters of the master plan. And we are supposed to be getting this month, the climate change, let me tell you, I pulled it up on my phone. So we will have the expanding housing opportunity as well as addressing climate change this month of the 2 draft chapters that we'll get. They'll be posted and there'll be a public meeting. The sustainability master plan meetings are open to the public, and we encourage that you can do it on Zoom or you can come here. This is where we've been having the meetings, generally the end of the workday at 5. So lots of good work happening, real meat and potatoes coming, or a veggie burger and fries or whatever. It's coming soon. So those are the two events happening.
So that master plan group is a subsection of the planning board. The planning board itself is continuing to work on site plan regulations and possible zoning amendments, which are fantastic and ambitious and really going to help address a lot of the housing issues is what's really the focus. I would strongly recommend any citizens who have an interest in submitting zoning amendments to do so. Come and see Rob Hausman. He's very, very willing to sit down with you and help you draft what you want, because the trick in submitting zoning amendments is that whatever you submit is the language that you use is the language that goes on the ballot. So it's in your best interest. If you have an issue we're not handling, then it's in your best interest to also word it in a way that gets other citizens interested. The next public submission hearings are going to be the 1st of November. Oh, I should mention Rob Hausman or his extremely able assistant Alex Taft, whom you may not have met yet, has taken over Vicki Smith's job. So he's one of our new hires. Yes, we haven't done that.
So are there any applications of the coming up in November that you know of?
Yes, no, not that we know of, but we've got 2 weeks to, yes, we're still waiting to hear from the Dartmouth Golf Course. No, everybody saw their original submission, which was informal submission, and we're really looking forward to them making their next submission to us, which is going to be a more formal application, because they led us to believe that they really wanted to fast track this circumstance, and so we've been here we are, waiting. And your Howe annual meeting is Sunday coming up 23rd from 4 to 5 o'clock. It will be pretty concise. Most of our committee chairmen are not speaking, so that we can you'll hear about them, but you won't see them, so that we can get it in a concise 1 hour.
Great. I have nothing to report. Bill?
Nothing to report.
Okay. Other business? Hearing none. There's been a request for a non-public session to discuss items pursuant to RSA 91A, 3A, and B.
Bill Garrity, yes.
Peter Christie, yes.
Nancy Carter, yes.
Joanna Whitcomb, yes.
Thanks, Gary. Okay, we are adjourned. We are in for non-public session.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate that.
Yeah.
Are we off?